Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a world where mud was money, disease was constant, and survival meant outsmarting not only your neighbors, but the entire feudal system. You're standing in a medieval marketplace bare feet, sinking into a slurry of rain, dung, and spilled ale. Chickens dart between your legs. Someone's yelling about stolen turnips, and the smell of roasted onions mixes with that familiar scent of unwashed humanity. It's the Middle Ages, and somehow this chaos is the birthplace of wealth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start at the bottom, dirt poor, living in a thatched hut that leaks more rain than it blocks. Your daily diet, mostly porridge that could double as plaster. But in this muddy maze of smells and noise, something interesting is happening. Traders are shouting prices, and behind every burlap sack lies a secret. Someone here is getting rich. You watch a man with a crooked smile sell miracle ointment made from goose fat and herbs. He claims it cures everything from warts to heartbreak. People are paying in silver. You realize profit doesn't start with gold. It starts with belief. And in the Middle Ages, belief was currency. A woman next to you sells dyed fabrics, bright as summer berries. You learn that those colors, especially blue, come from plants so rare that merchants guard them with knives. Historians still argue whether the famous woad dye trade was more profitable than medieval salt. But either way, you notice something. People are willing to pay extra for comfort, color, or even the illusion of both. You wander past stalls filled with honey, onions, and fish that's definitely seen better days. Someone's hawking fresh leeches for medical use. Another guy's selling wooden shoes with extra luck carved into the soles. And just beyond the noise, a small group of merchants whisper quietly near the town. Well, they're not shouting, they're negotiating. Deals, promises, long-term plans. They'll leave richer while everyone else fights over cabbages. That's when you start to understand. The poor work hard, but the rich work smart. You could spend your life hoeing the Lord's field for a loaf of bread, or you could figure out how to sell that same bread for twice the price by moving it across the river where grain's scarce. A boy beside you collects discarded fish bones. Disgusting, maybe. But he grinds them into powder and sells them to apothecaries as ground unicorn horn. You laugh, but the apothecaries don't. They buy it. You start wondering who's the fool. Somewhere behind you, a bell tolls noon. The local church collects 10% of everyone's earning. You watch the priest's hands disappear into a heavy chest. He blesses the poor and counts the coins of the rich. You think maybe holiness pays too. There's a merchant from Venice, too polished for this muddy place. He's surrounded by fabrics smoother than anything you've ever touched. He talks about far-off lands where people eat spices instead of turnips and pay with coins that shine like stars. You overhear him mention profit margin. You don't know what that means yet, but it sounds powerful like a spell. Then someone drops a sack of salt. People rush to grab it before it vanishes into the mud. Salt white gold, they call it. You'd never thought of it as anything special. But in this age, salt preserves meat, flavors food, and keeps ships stocked for journeys that last months. A merchant who controls salt controls life itself. You think that could be me someday. But don't get too dreamy. You probably won't survive this decade. Between plague, taxes, and an angry boar or two, the odds are stacked against you. Yet the chance, the tiny, glittering chance to claw your way up through wit and risk, that's the thrill. That's what keeps you trudging through the muck. And it's not all hopeless. You find that a few clever peasants have figured out how to game the system. One man rents a patch of forest, collects fallen wood, and sells it to the monastery for candles. He doesn't own land, but he owns access. Another grows onions so massive they're practically medieval luxury items. Both men started like you, empty-handed. As the sun dips low, golden light pools across the market. You catch a glimpse of yourself in a puddle, mud-smeared, tired, but maybe just a little wiser. You've seen that wealth isn't always inherited. Sometimes it's hustled from dirt, sweat, and a few good lies. Some historians believe the medieval marketplace was the first form of free enterprise where anyone could rise, if they were bold enough. Others argue it was just another layer of feudal control, designed to keep commoners dreaming of freedom, while nobles raked in the real wealth. The truth, probably somewhere in the mud. You wipe your hands on your tunic and glance back at the fading stalls. Tomorrow, maybe you'll trade something small. Maybe you'll risk it all. But tonight, you've learned the first rule of medieval fortune. Riches begin with observation. You don't need a castle. You need curiosity. And as you walk home, the night smells of smoke and wet earth. Somewhere in the distance, a merchant counts coins under candlelight. He's not smarter than you just earlier. Tomorrow, you'll be early too. You wake before dawn, the sky still more soot than sunrise. The village stirs like a beast groaning, clanging, coughing to life. You tie a rope around your waist for a belt, grab the stale end of yesterday's bread, and set off down the dirt path toward the trader's road. You've heard rumors about men who vanish for months and come back wearing velvet, about merchants who gamble everything on faraway markets and return rich enough to buy titles. You don't know the word capitalism, but you're about to invent your own version of it. The air changes as you reach the edge of town. There's a wagon creaking by, loaded with barrels of salt. The driver nods. You nod back. He's headed south, probably toward the coast, maybe even to the port at Bristol. That's where the real money flows. Spices, silk, sugar, and dream. But each journey is a gamble. Roads are haunted, not by ghosts, but by bandits with dull swords and sharper instincts. And yet the merchants keep traveling, because the margins are insane. You overhear one merchant mutter that he bought a sack of pepper for 1 coin in Alexandria and sold it for 20 in London. Pepper, the same stuff you sneeze at. You imagine holding a tiny pouch of it, your fingers trembling, because in this world it's worth more than gold. Historians still argue whether pepper was the single most profitable commodity of the medieval period. But the numbers don't lie. It turned bold traders into lords and cautious ones into corpses. You follow the sound of hooves and iron wheels. A caravan is forming, bound eastward. You blend in with the helpers, pretending you belong, you listen. The merchant leading the group is a broad-shouldered Genoese with a scar across his chin. His men load crates stamped with strange marks cargo, bound for somewhere you can't pronounce. He talks about prices, protection fees, and insurance, which, in medieval terms, means paying local warlords to not rob you. The man glances at you. You can walk, boy. You nod, then walk behind the cart. Don't talk, don't steal, don't die. And just like that, you're in the trade. The road winds through forests and fields. You learn fast. Every stop, every town has a pulse. Wine sells better near monasteries, copper near blacksmiths, dried fish wherever the smell is least offensive. You see profit in everything, in mud, in motion, in the smallest spark of human want. At one campfire, a merchant shows you a silk scarf, so fine it slips through his fingers like smoke. From Cathay, he whispers, which you later learn means China. He says it came through 10 hands, 5 taxes, and 2 wars. Each time, the price grew fatter. You realize wealth multiplies, not at the source, but in the journey. The world is one long markup. The stars burn cold above as you drift towards sleep. Somewhere nearby, wolves cry out, and you wonder if they're hungrier than you are. Probably not. By the next market, you've seen how caravans gamble everything on luck. Floods, thieves, disease could erase a fortune overnight. But when it works spectacularly. One spice ship from Alexandria could bankroll a castle, and one storm could send that same castle to the bottom of the sea. The medieval rich lived on the edge of disaster, and they loved it. At a seaside tavern, sailors brag about the Venetian deal. You lean in. Apparently, the city of Venice has mastered something revolutionary: joint investment. Merchants pool money for a single ship. If it sinks, everyone loses a little. If it returns, everyone wins a lot. Historians still debate whether this was the birth of the stock market. You just call it brilliant. You picture yourself years from now owning a piece of a fleet-turning money while sitting safely on dry land. It feels like cheating. You like it. But even as you daydream, a rough voice beside you says, "You know what they call a merchant who loses one shipment?" You shake your head. A beggar. The man laughs, drinks, and stumbles off into the night. You walk along the docks at dawn. Ships creak, ropes groan, gulls scream. The smell of tar, salt, and rot fills your lungs. You realize every crate is a lottery ticket. Some hold spices, some hold silk, some hold disappointment. But all of them carry a story, and somewhere inside that chaos, money sleeps, waiting for the right fool to wake it. You watch dock workers hauling barrels labeled salt, olive oil, wine. But one small crate catches your eye. It's marked only with a red handprint. The dockmaster says it's relics, holy bones from Jerusalem. You wonder if they're real. Probably not, but they'll sell. Because in this age, belief sells better than truth. By the end of the day, you've earned a few coins unloading cargo. You buy bread, a sliver of cheese, and sit by the water. A merchant next to you counts his gold and sighs not from joy, but exhaustion. You notice his hands are cracked, his back bent, his face lined by the sea. You realize something strange. In the Middle Ages, being rich didn't always mean being comfortable. It meant surviving your own ambition. As the wind whips salt into your face, you think of that muddy marketplace back home, the goose fat seller, the onion man, the boy with the fish bones. Maybe they're still there, dreaming smaller dreams. Though you've seen the road now, the gamble, the promise. And though you have almost nothing to your name, the stars above you look a little different tonight, like scattered coins just out of reach. You return from the road leaner, wiser, and carrying a pouch of foreign coins that jingle with delicious promise. The market seems smaller, now its smells, its noise, its messel familiar, all part of the same machine you've just seen from the top down. But this time, you're not here to buy or sell onions. You're here to build. You've heard whispers of guilds, those secretive brotherhoods of craftsmen who control entire industries. You find them everywhere. The blacksmith's hammer echoing through dawn. The weaver's shuttle clicking like a heartbeat. The brewer's cauldron hissing with yeast and secrets. Each guild runs its trade like a medieval mafia rules ranks and ruthless discipline. But join them, and you get what every peasant dreams of: stability. The blacksmith guild is your first stop. The master smith eyes you over his anvil, sparks flaring between you like judgment. He asks if you can lift a hammer. You nod. He laughs. You'll learn, he says. And that's how your apprenticeship begins. Days melt into weeks, and your arms grow thick from swinging steel. You learn to shape metal the way the rich shape people, with heat, patience, and occasional violence. But what fascinates you most isn't the craft, it's the system. Every nail you forge, every horseshoe you finish, earns you not just coins, but reputation. The guild tracks your work, your hours, even your attitude. It's like medieval LinkedIn, minus the motivational quotes. You discover that craftsmen are the quiet backbone of wealth. The merchants gamble, but craftsmen compounds slowly, steadily. They perfect something small until people can't live without it. Historians still argue whether guilds helped or hurt innovation. They kept trade fair, but also crushed outsiders. You can't decide which side you're on, you just want in. One night, after too much ale, an older smith confides in you. There's gold in secrecy, lad. Never show your full process. He's right. The guild's greatest power isn't its hammers, it's knowledge hoarding. Recipes, techniques, formulas, all guarded like royal treasure. A single brewing method can feed generations. You realize that in the Middle Ages, intellectual property doesn't come with patents, it comes with blades. You move through other trades, studying them like puzzles. The brewers use barley, yeast, and time to spin water into profit. The weavers mix dyes so vivid they make nobles weep. The masons carve cathedrals and hide their signatures in stone. You hear about one mason who signed his initials behind every altar, betting his name would outlive the priest's. It did. At sunset, you walk through the craftsman's quarter. The air hums with industry, the clang of tools, the thud of looms, the sweet rot of fermenting beer. You feel like you're inside a living clock, each artisan a gear turning toward the same goal: prosperity. You start noticing something peculiar. The guilds are not just workplaces, they're families. Apprentices live with masters, eat at the same table, and inherit their trade. The guild even handles funerals and medical care. You realize that joining one isn't a career move, it's a lifetime contract. But not everyone's happy about it. Outside the walls, unlicensed workers, called journeymen, grumble that guilds crush competition. One baker tells you he was fined for selling bread too cheap. Fair trade, they called it. Theft, he spits. Historians still argue whether guilds were forces of stability or greed. Maybe both. You just know they make people nervous, and that's usually a sign of power. One afternoon, a traveling merchant visits your workshop. He carries a pouch of rare blue dye from the East lapis lazuli, ground to powder. He says painters use it for the Virgin Mary's robes. You watch your master haggle like a chess player. He trades 3 barrels of iron nails for a thimble of blue dust. At first, it seems absurd. You learn the golden rule of medieval wealth. Value isn't. What something is it, s. What people believe it, s. worth. You begin experimenting quietly. You mix charcoal with crushed eggshells, stir it with honey, and make black ink that dries faster than the churches. You sell it to a scribe for a few coins, who sells it to a monk for triple. The profit makes your head spin. That night, you sit by the fire, your hands blackened with soot, but trembling with possibility. The guilds may own the city, but inside each of them lives the seed of something greater innovation. You feel it burning behind your ribs, like molten iron waiting to be shaped. As you stare into the flames, you think about your journey so far: the mud markets, the merchant caravans, the gambling of gold and life. Each step has taught you that wealth in this world doesn't just belong to those born into it. It belongs to the ones who understand systems. The guild is your system now. It's not glamorous. There's no perfume, no silk, just smoke and sweat and iron dust. But here, you can build a foundation, a real one. You're not begging for favor or risking your life on the sea. You're crafting something tangible, something that will outlast you. Somewhere down the street, the church bells ring for vespers. The sound rolls over the rooftops like thunder, bouncing off the stone walls of the craftsman's quarter. You wipe your hands, stretch your aching shoulders, and smile faintly. You may not be rich yet, but you're no longer poor. You've entered the circle. And from here, for the first time, you can see the path upward. The glow of the forge flickers across your face, warm and golden, as if the fire itself approves. Tomorrow, you'll return to work and maybe, just maybe, start your own secret someday. Because in the Middle Ages, real wealth isn't inherited, it's forged. By now, your hands are calloused, your back strong, and your purse heavier than it used to be. But here's the thing, no matter how skilled you are, you still hand over half your earnings to the man whose name sits on a deed you'll never touch, the Lord, the one who owns not just the land, but the air you breathe on it. You start to realize that real power doesn't come from hammers or ships or even gold. It comes from land. You see it every morning when you pass the manor. The Lord's servants sweep dust from his steps, though the floor will never truly be clean. Cows wander lazily across his fields, fat and content, while peasants bend their backs to tend the soil. The crops may grow under the sun, but the profits grow under his name. Still, rumors float through the village like dandelion seeds. Some say a clever peasant can buy his own plot. Others whisper about merchants who marry widows with land deeds tucked under their pillows. You start to think about it, not as fantasy, but as strategy. If you can't be born noble, maybe you can buy your way into nobility. One evening, at the tavern, you overhear a conversation between two men, a local tax collector and a drunk with loose lips. Did you hear? The collector slurred. Old Lord Gresham's selling part of his estate. Needs coin for the king's war. You sit quietly, pretending not to listen, but your ears burn. Land for sale. That's not something that happens every day. Of course, you can't just walk up and slap coins on the table. Lords sell land like they trade secrets, quietly, cautiously, and usually to people who already have titles. But sometimes desperation bends the rules, and the Black Death didn't just take lives, it took heirs. Many estates now sit half empty, waiting for new masters. You start small. You lend a little money here, trade a little there. You partner with a local brewer to supply ale to the manor's workers. Each coin that passes through your hands feels like a seed, something you can plant in richer soil. Then, one day, it happens. The steward of Lord Gresham's estate mentions casually that a small patch of meadow near the river is being leased. Not sold, of course leased. For a fee, you can farm it, graze it, or even build on it. You nod as if it's nothing, but inside you're grinning like a thief. Because this, right here, is how upward mobility begins in the Middle Ages, not with a crown, but with a contract. You take the lease. You grow barley on that meadow, and when the harvest comes, you sell the grain to the guild. You pay your rent, of course, but the profit remains yours. You reinvest, rent another acre, then another. You hire 2 workers, peasants, like you used to be. Suddenly, you're not the one bending over in the field anymore. You're the one collecting the share. It's intoxicating. You visit the manor to deliver payment, walking past portraits of ancestors who've never touched dirt in their lives. The steward takes your pouch and nods approvingly. A reliable man, he says. Perhaps more land next season. You bow, but inside you're already calculating. Historians still argue whether the rise of the yeoman class, the landholding commoners, was the true start of the middle class. You don't care what they call it. You just know you've tasted a kind of power that feels addictive. But there's a catch. There's always a catch. One winter, a storm floods your fields. The barley rots. The Lord still demands rent. When you plead for mercy, he offers a loan at an interest rate that could drown a saint. You realize the land isn't freedom, it's leverage. The nobility use it to control, to bind, to remind you that even when you prosper, you're still feeding someone else's ledger. You start noticing how the system protects itself. If you grow too fast, the taxes rise. If you buy too much, the church questions your humility. But you also learn to adapt. You marry a widow whose late husband held a tiny piece of land on the edge of your own. With that union, your property doubles overnight. Romance, hardly. Strategic affection, maybe. You tell yourself love can grow ladder like crops in spring. At the next harvest fair, you walk through the crowd, not as a laborer, but as a man who owns his own plot. People nod differently now. Even the tax collector greets you by name. You've crossed an invisible line. Still, you can't help noticing how fragile it all is. One bad season, one greedy lord, one royal war, and everything could vanish. You see men richer than you hauled off to debtor's prison, their estates swallowed back into noble hands. You learn to keep your wealth quiet, your ambitions quieter. One night, as you count your coins by candlelight, the flicker of the flame dances over the parchment of your land lease. You trace the seal with your finger, the Lord's crest pressed deep into the wax. You think, this is his world. I'm just renting it. Then you smile, because somewhere deep inside, a thought whispers back, not forever. Historians still argue whether peasants ever truly escaped feudalism before the Renaissance. But sitting there, with the hum of crickets outside and the scent of barley in your hair, you feel something they can't measure: momentum. The mud no longer clings to your feet. The manor's shadow feels less like a cage and more like a challenge. UVA learned the second rule of medieval fortune. If you can beat the Lordsby, come one, piece by piece. You don't remember the first time someone called you master, but you remember how strange it sounded. It wasn't the tone of reverence that the nobles received, nor the hollow politeness of servants. It was something quieter: an acknowledgement, a recognition that you had built something. Your barley fields had turned steady profit for 3 seasons now. The lease still hung over your head like a cloud, but you had learned to work within its shadow. The profits had become your compass. You reinvested. Unlike land doesn't drown in a storm. It started with carts wooden, rattling, stubborn things. You bought 2, then 3, loading them with sacks of grain and barrels of ale. You hired a boy to drive them to the next market town. A week later, he returned with a profit and a story. Merchants there were paying double for clean cloth. You'd never woven a thing in your life, but you knew opportunity when you heard it. The road was rough mud, puddles, and potholes deep enough to swallow a wheel. Travelers passed you, wrapped in cloaks, faces hidden, hands never far from their daggers. The forests along the way were haunted, or so they said, though most ghosts wore rags and demanded your purse instead of your soul. When you finally reached the town gates, you stood in awe. It wasn't large by modern measure, perhaps a few thousand souls, but to you it was another world. Stone wall, market stalls bursting with color, bells chiming from church towers, and everywhere the noise of ambition, haggling, hammering, laughter, and prayer, all mixed into one great living hum. You saw guild banners flapping above the stalls, symbols of the merchants, tailors, masons, and bakers. In this world, your birth didn't matter as much as your skill, and skill could be measured, stamped, and sold. You spent the first night in a tavern, thick with smoke and the smell of roasted meat. Merchants spoke of trade routes that reached across seas. A man from Bruges boasted of ships filled with spices and silk. Another bragged of loans to knights who couldn't afford their armor. You listened, always listened. By dawn, you understood something the village never taught you. Wealth wasn't just grown, it was moved. So you joined the Weavers' Guild, not because you could weave, but because you could finance those who could. You fronted coin for wool and thread, for dyes that smelled of vinegar and dreams. The craftsmen worked, and you collected your share. You didn't need to touch the loom, only the ledger. Months passed, then years. You began to travel more often, learning the rhythm of markets like a heartbeat. Spring fairs in Winchester, summer trade in Bristol, autumn contracts in York. With every journey, your purse grew heavier and your conscience lighter. You had stopped thinking like a peasant long ago, but with new ground came new rule. Guilds had their own hierarchies, masters, journeymen, apprentices. You were tolerated, then respected, then quietly resented. Old merchants didn't like upstarts with no lineage. You smiled through their sneers, bought them ale, and studied their books when they drank too much to guard them. One evening, a gray-bearded dyer leaned close and whispered, "You remind me of myself 30 years ago. Just be careful, lad. The higher you climb, the fewer friends you'll have to catch you." You laughed politely, but that night, as you stared into the candlelight of your rented room, the words lingered like smoke. Back home, the fields still needed tending. The widow you'd married managed the accounts, and your hired men oversaw the harvest. You sent letters sealed with wax your own mark, now, not the Lord's crest. It wasn't power, not yet, but it was presence. The first time you rode into your village, on horseback, children stopped to stare. The blacksmith greeted you with a bow, too deep to be casual. The Lord's steward nodded as you passed, pretending not to remember the days you'd worked his fields. But you remembered, and though the manor still loomed above the hills, it no longer felt unreachable. You began lending money to others' farmers, tradesmen, even a minor knight whose debts outweighed his armor. You charged fair interest, but interest nonetheless. Your coin traveled faster than you could. Soon, men you'd never met were paying you back in goods and gratitude. It was intoxicating again, the kind of quiet power that doesn't announce itself, it accumulates. Still, there were nights when you woke to the sound of rain and thought about how it used to mean ruin. Now, it just meant another calculation, another market shift. You found yourself at a crossroads, not just of roads, but of identity. You weren't noble, but you weren't common anymore. You lived in the gray space between neither bound by soil nor blessed by birthright. The scholars would later call it proto-capitalism. You didn't have a word for it. You just knew that the world was changing, and for once, you were changing with it. At the midsummer fair, a monk preaching from a wooden stage declared that greed was sin. The crowd listened, half guilty, half bored. You watched him and wondered, was it greed to want stability, to want a life where famine didn't decide your fate? When he shouted that rich men shall struggle to enter heaven, you smiled faintly and dropped a silver coin into his bowl. Insurance, perhaps. That night, as the fair fires burned and music drifted through the fields, you realized something profound. The lords had inherited their wealth. The priests had promised theirs in the afterlife. But you had built yours from mud and chance. You looked up at the sky, at the same stars that once guided ships and shepherds alike, and thought, maybe the real power isn't owning the land or the people. Maybe it's owning your direction. That was the third rule of medieval fortune. Gold moves faster than titles. You learn, over the years, that gold is not a sound, it's a silence. When it clinks, it announces itself. But when it sits, hidden in a chest beneath your floorboards, that's when it truly speaks. A quiet hum in the mind. A presence that keeps you awake longer than hunger ever did. You count it, sometime, by candlelight, just to hear the soft slide of coins between your fingers. They feel almost alive. Each one has its own story, earned from a sale, a lease, a risk taken when others hesitated. They're your past, your proof, your armor. But here's the problem with gold. It doesn't stay still. Not for long. The king's war taxes rise again, and the church invents new indulgences to forgive new sins. There's always someone above you demanding their share. The difference now is that you know how to negotiate. You don't beg for mercy anymore. You bargain for time. You lend money to the very steward who once collected rent from you. You buy barrels of ale at harvest and sell them back during Lent when fasting makes prices soar. You learn that morality bends easily when profit is involved. And yet, there are moments when you pause. Walking through the village, you notice how children's laughter echoes between cottages that still leak when it rains. The baker's wife still counts her loaves carefully, praying she has enough for both the poor and the taxman. You see the faces you once knew, people who never left the mud. Some look at you with admiration, others with quiet resentment. You can't blame them. You've changed in ways they can't name. One day, an old friend, a farmer you once worked beside, approaches you outside the church. His beard is gray now, his hands rougher than the plow he pushes. He says softly, "You've done well for yourself." You nod. Luck and patience. He shakes his head. Luck, maybe. But the rest of us worked just as hard. The soil doesn't reward everyone the same. You don't have an answer for that. That night, as rain taps against the shutters, you lie awake thinking about his words. You realize the ladder you've climbed was built from other people's backs. The same system that crushed you once, now you've learned to use it. It's a strange kind of justice, or maybe hypocrisy. You can't tell anymore. Still, life goes on. Seasons turn like gears in a clock. Your trade expands cloth, grain, even small shipments of tin and salt from distant ports. You invest in ships you'll never sail, in goods you'll never touch. You hire men who know the seas better than you ever will. Every month, the profit sheets arrive, sealed and signed. You start wearing finer clothes. Not noble finery, but the subtle, kind, soft linen, dyed deep with indigo, a sign to those who understand such things. You no longer eat with your hands. You write your own letters. You seal them with wax, marked by your own insignia, barley stalk crossed with a hammer, a reminder of where you began. Then, one winter, news reaches you. Lord Gresham, the man whose name once stamped your lease, is dead. His heirs are gone, wiped out by sickness or debt. The estate is for sale. You sit very still for a long time. When you finally speak, it's only one sentence. Send a rider to the steward. I'll make an offer. Weeks later, you stand once again before the manor gates. But this time, you don't bow. The stone walls look smaller, somehow. The carved archway less imposing. Inside, the same portraits hang in the hall. The same ancestors with painted eyes staring down in quiet arrogance. The steward greets you politely, but there's tension in his smile. He knows what this means. Everyone does. You sign the contract. Your hand doesn't shake. When the wax seal hardens, the parchment cool beneath your palm, you realize something extraordinary. For the first time in your life, no one owns you. You step outside, the winter air cuts sharp against your face. The fields stretch out before you, your fields now. The same soil you once bled in, cursed in, prayed over. You walk to the edge, kneel, and press your fingers into the cold mud. It doesn't feel like victory, not entirely. More like a long exhale. You think of your father, who never left the village, of the lords who once dined while peasants starved, of every coin, every deal, every sleepless night that brought you here. And then, for the first time in decades, you laugh. Not a loud, triumphant laugh, just a quiet one. The kind that feels like forgiveness. Because you learned the truth. Freedom, in this age, isn't given it purchased. One field, one cart, one contract at a time. Years later, when travelers pass through and see your estate, they call you Lord. You don't correct them. Titles are just echoes anyway. You let them ring. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind whispers through the barley and the candles burn low, you still hear the faint sound of hammers from long ago, the rhythm of labor, of beginnings. And you remember the man you once were, calloused hands, hungry eyes, and a dream so distant it barely seemed real. You whisper to the dark, as if the past can still hear you, I made it. That's the last rule of medieval fortune. Gold may buy land, but grit builds legacy. By now, your name carries a certain weight in the market square. The bakers nod when you pass. The guards salute, though you never asked them to. Even the tax collector, yes, that oily man with ink-stained fingers and an expression that could sour milk, greets you with forced politeness. You've grown accustomed to this rhythm of power, the quiet ballet of coins and influence. But tonight, as you sit by the fire, a knock rattles the door. 3 times, slow, deliberate, official. You already know who it is. When you open it, there stands the royal tax assessor, cloak dripping from the rain, his smile carved like a blade. Good evening, my lord, he says, a little too sweetly. We've come to review your holdings. Ah, yes, the inevitable reckoning. He steps inside, eyes darting over the furniture, the tapestries, the silver goblets on the shelf. He makes small talk about the weather, about how fine the harvest was this year, about how fortunate you've been. Then, as if absent-mindedly, he unrolls a scroll as long as your arm. This year's levies, he murmurs. You'll see the king requires just a little more. You stare at the numbers, and something in your stomach tightens. They've doubled the rate again. You manage a polite smile. And if I can't pay, he shrugs. The crown always finds a way to collect. That night, you sit alone by the fire, coins spread across the table like fallen leaves. You realize something painful. Success makes you visible. The higher you rise, the easier it is for others to notice your shine and decide they want a share. You think about the old days when the taxman barely knew your name. Now he knows the color of your drapes. Still, you're not without options. You've learned the art of survival, the same trick your former lords once used. Influence, favors, gifts that look suspiciously like bribes, but are wrapped in polite conversation. So, you invite the assessor back for dinner. Roast duck, honeyed mead, a seat by the fire. You talk about everything except money. By the time dessert arrives, he's laughing at your jokes and promising to reconsider the figures. You realize, with a strange mix of pride and disgust, that you've become part of the very machine you used to despise. Historians still argue whether medieval corruption was born from greed or necessity. You'd say it's both. When the system bleeds you dry, morality becomes a luxury few can afford. Over the next months, you watch others fall. The miller's debts swallow his land. The brewer loses his license for improper payments. You quietly buy their holdings through middlemen, disguising your reach. Every failure around you becomes an opportunity. But the tax collector, he never disappears. He just changes faces. A new one arrives, younger, hungrier. He demands audits, wants transparency, and whispers about heresy when people grumble about taxes. You pay him in coin and kindness, but you sense the truth. No amount will ever satisfy them. One morning, as you walk through your estate, you spot a boy chasing a goose across the path. He's barefoot, laughing, free. You envy him for a moment, because real freedom, you're beginning to understand, isn't wealth, it's anonymity. You once wanted to climb out of the mud. Now you find yourself sinking into gold. Still, you play the game. You write letters to the royal clerk, praising the crown's wise governance. You donate candles to the church, sponsor a festival, and quietly fund a bridge that bears your name. Each act is both charity and camouflage. But behind it all, you keep one secret ledger hidden beneath the floorboards, wrapped in oilcloth. That's where you record what really matters. The money that moves unseen, loans to merchants, quiet trades through foreign agents, deals made in whispers. And sometimes, when you trace the neat lines of ink, you smile at the irony. You've become what the church once condemned a man who profits from interest. A sin, technically. But then again, so is gluttony, and priests seem rather well fed. You start noticing something else, too. The tax collectors, those agents of the crown, often die early. Fevers, accidents, mysterious disappearances. The peasants hate them. The nobles distrust them. They live rich, but never long. One day you find yourself thinking, better to be the man who lends to the tax collector than the man who collects. So you shift your focus. You begin financing the crown's own officers' quiet loans that they never speak of, but always repay. They think they own you favors. In truth, you own them. The irony is almost poetic. Historians still debate whether medieval finance birthed capitalism or merely dressed feudalism in fancier clothes. You think about that as you watch your tenants sow barley beneath the same gray sky you once labored under. Nothing changes, only the hands holding the coins. At night, you dream of coins raining from the sky, each one marked with a different crest. You wake to the sound of wind against the shutters and realize the truth. There will always be a crown, a church, and a collector. But there will also always be someone clever enough to make them all pay interest. And that, perhaps, is your quiet revenge. Because, in this age, the truest wealth isn't measured in Goldyites in immunity. You can buy protection. You can buy silence. You can even buy forgiveness, but freedom that you still chase like a whisper in the dark. You hear the ocean before you see it, that steady, endless breath against the shore, the heartbeat of every fortune built beyond the edge of the map. The first time you walk the docks, the smell of salt and fish feels like a slap, but beneath it, you catch another scent. Opportunity. Ships creak against their ropes, sails flapping like restless ghosts. Men shout in half a dozen languages, Flemish, Italian, Arabic, something from far beyond your reach. The sea, it seems, speaks all tongues when there's profit to be made. You've traded on land long enough. Barley, iron, wool, they've all filled your purse, but your dreams are getting larger than your fields. You want something riskier, wilder. The kind of wealth that doesn't just fill ledgers, builds legends. That's when you meet the sailors. They drink hard, lie harder, and carry stories like treasure chests waiting to be pried open. Tales of sunken galleons, cursed islands, and ports where a single pearl can buy a lifetime of comfort. You know better than to believe all of it. But even lies, in the right light, can point toward truth. One evening, a man with a scar over one eye sits beside you at the tavern. He smells of tar and rum, his hands stained with pitch. You ever think about where your wool goes? He asks, eyes glinting. You sell it to traders. They load it on ships, and those ships some never make it home, but their cargo. It always finds a new owner. You lean closer. You're talking about piracy. He grins, teeth yellowed but proud. Privateering, my friend. All legal, if you've got the right royal signature. Historians still argue whether the line between pirate and privateer ever truly existed. You don't bother arguing. The difference, you suspect, is just paperwork. So, you take a small step into this gray world. You finance a ship not too big, not too loud. The Marian's Hope, a merchant vessel by name, but with a few cannons tucked discreetly below deck. The captain, of course, is the scarred man from the tavern. The first voyage takes months. You wait nervously, pacing your estate like a man haunted. But one morning, a rider arrives. The ship has returned. When you meet the captain at the dock, he's grinning wider than the horizon. He throws open a crate silver coins, silks, spices that make your eyes water with their scent. Officially, they're recovered goods. Unofficially, you both know they once belonged to a rival kingdom. You count your share in silence. It's more money than you've ever seen at once. Enough to buy 3 more ships. Enough to buy absolution twice over. But as you stand there, the wind whipping through the rigging, you notice something else. Every sailor on the dock watches you with a mix of awe and hunger. In this world, success paints a target on your back faster than failure ever could. Still, you lean into it. The sea becomes your new marketplace. You invest in salt caravans, cargo routes, even whaling expeditions. You learn the rhythms of tides and trade winds without ever stepping foot on a deck. And then, one day, your luck turns. A storm-angry biblical, the kind that seems to roar with divine disapproval swallows 2 of your ships whole. Another is seized by the crown for unauthorized engagement. The captain is hanged in the square, his body left as a warning. You attend the execution, hood drawn, pretending to be a curious bystander. When the rope snaps tight, you don't flinch. You just think about the cargo that went down with him. All those coins, now resting in silence beneath the waves. It doesn't end there. Soon, letters arrive from officials demanding compensation for unlawful trade. They threaten your name, your property, even your title. You realize that in the game of maritime fortune, the crown is both investor and thief. So you pivot quietly. You start selling ships instead of funding them. You supply ropes, tar, canvasol, the things pirates and privateers alike can't sail without. You profit from every voyage, no matter who flies the flag. It's cleaner that way. You begin meeting with men who never show their faces. They call themselves merchants, explorers, traders, but their coins come from places with names you can't pronounce. One pays you in rubies the size of plums, another in gold coins stamped with symbols long forgotten. Each transaction feels like a confession. And yet you sleep better than ever. Because in the medieval world, sin is just another form of commerce. You can always buy forgiveness. The church sells it wholesale. On Sundays, you kneel in the chapel like everyone else. You listen to the priest warn against greed, envy, and avarice. You nod along piously, the faint smell of sea salt still clinging to your cloak. You drop a generous donation into the tithe box enough to fund a new altar, maybe even a new bell tower. The priest beams. The Lord blesses those who give. You smile back, thinking, he certainly does. Historians still argue whether piracy was the lifeblood or the poison of medieval trade. You'd argue it was both, a disease that kept the patient alive. By now, your name has reached far shores. Men whisper of you in dockside taverns, some with admiration, others with hatred. You're not just a landowner anymore. You're a man who owns the wind. But one evening, as you watch the sunset spill gold across the sea, you can't help wondering, how much farther can this climb go before the tide turns for good? The gulls scream overhead. The waves hiss against the rocks. And somewhere deep inside, you hear that same dangerous whisper. You finally start to grasp that in the Middle Ages, riches weren't about what glittered, they were about who noticed you glittering. And no one mastered the art of being noticed quite like the silk merchants. You imagine yourself standing in a cramped Venetian shop, the air thick with the smell of sea salt, candle wax, and freshly unpacked bolts of silk from the east. Your fingertips graze the shimmering threads, scarlet, gold, indigo colors, so rich they could make a monk sin. If you wanted to get filthy rich in this world, silk was your lottery ticket, imported along dangerous trade routes from China and Byzantium. Each yard of the stuff could be worth more than its weight in silver. The Silk Road wasn't a metaphor, it was a lifeline, pulsing with merchants, thieves, and opportunists like you. You buy cheap, sell high, grease the right palms, and pray the ship doesn't sink halfway across the Mediterranean. But there's a secret trick here. Real silk importers rarely did the traveling. They hired daring souls called factors agents who handled the risk while you sat comfortably counting profits back home. It's like medieval dropshipping, minus the Wi-Fi and customer complaints. You send letters sealed with wax, your name scrawled in Latin, and your agents move mountains of fabric through Venice, Genoa, and Bruges. If fortune smiles, you double your wealth in a season. If it doesn't, well, there's always plague insurance. Historians still argue whether Venice's silk dominance was born from genius or sheer luck. Maybe it was both. By the 13th century, the city's looms were spinning threads finer than any Eastern import. The secret silk smuggler. There's a tale of two monks who, under orders from the Byzantine emperor, smuggled silkworm eggs out of China in hollow bamboo sticks. You picture them sweating through customs, pretending those wriggling passengers are just bamboo snacks. It's the kind of story that would make even your sleepiest subscribers raise an eyebrow. You set up shop near the Rialto Bridge, where the smell of river mud mingles with roasted chestnuts and the chatter of 100 languages. Your workers tired, underpaid, and perpetually coughing from silk dust feed the looms from dawn to dusk. Every thread that hums through their hands inches you closer to power. And power, here, wears robes. Velvet, to be exact. Nobles, bishops, even popes line up to buy your shimmering cloth, because appearance was everything. The richer the fabric, the holier the man looked. A clever illusion. One quirky tidbit: medieval sumptuary laws actually dictated who could wear what. You, as a silk merchant, might be banned from wearing your own product. Imagine selling $1,000,000 Gucci, but having to show up in thrift store linen because the Duke says you read to peasant for purple. Still, you find ways around it. Perhaps you line your sleeves or secretly stitch silk inside your collar, so only your neck knows how rich you feel. By now, you've learned that medieval wealth isn't just about gold or trade. It's about status theater. The market stalls are your stage, your fabrics, the script. People believe what they see, and you sell dreams they can wear. You learn to talk in subtle codes: a merchant's handshake, a coin's flip, a glance toward the church tower when you're making a deal that shouldn't exist. And beneath all this finery lies danger. Pirates stalk the seas, guilds guard their secrets like dragons, and rival merchants plant rumors to ruin you. One whisper that your silks are impure, and your fortune turns to dust. So you cultivate allies, priests to bless your shipments, scribes to forge trade papers, and maybe one or two loyal friends in the city council. Sometimes, when the moonlight hits your warehouse just right, you catch your reflection in a roll of black silks, flawless, untouchable land. You realize how far you've come. Once, you were just another barefoot dreamer with calloused hands. Now, you deal in shimmer and whisper. And yet, you can't shake a strange truth. In this age, wealth is as fragile as the fabric you sell. One fire, one shipwreck, one royal mood swing, and you could lose it all by dawn. Still, as you walk home through the flickering lamplight of the Venetian canals, the sound of water lapping at the stones, you smile. The scent of silk clings to you, soft and warm. Somewhere in the shadows, another merchant eyes you with envy. He doesn't know that tomorrow you'll corner the market on crimson dye, or that you're already planning to bribe a monk for PayPal contracts. You're not just getting rich, you're weaving yourself into history. You wake the next morning in your Venetian townhouse. Sif, you can call it that. The walls lean slightly, the canal laps against the door, and the smell of salt and wet wood fills the air. But you don't mind. You're rich now. Or, at least, you look rich, which is almost the same thing in the Middle Ages. You run your fingers over a robe lined with the softest silk, embroidered with gold thread from Cyprus. Somewhere below, gondoliers shout curses at each other. Above you, doves scatter across a pink dawn sky. You step outside, but not toward the market this time. No, you've realized something bigger. Merchants make good money, but bankers make everyone else's money. You want in. You walk to Florence, the city that practically invented capitalism, before capitalism had a name. The year might be 1300 or so, but the streets are already humming with deals. Coins clink in purses, ledgers fill with inked numbers, and every second man seems to be called Giovanni. You pass the famous Medici Bank, its sin gleaming faintly in the morning light. Behind its doors, fortunes shift like tides. Historians still argue whether the Medici truly invented modern banking or simply stole better ideas from others. But one thing's clear: they turned accounting into alchemy. You could make more gold from a quill than from a mine. You sit down with a Florentine notary who explains the concept of letters of exchange, a genius invention that lets you move money without actually moving money. You hand over gold in Venice, and your associate in London can collect the same amount, minus a fee, weeks later. It's medieval PayPal, except if something goes wrong, no customer support, just a duel. A quirky tidbit: medieval bankers weren't technically allowed to charge interest. The church forbade it as sinful usury, but clever minds found loopholes. You didn't charge interest. You charged service fees. You didn't lend. You invested. God couldn't keep up with the paperwork. Before long, you're sitting in a candlelit counting house, surrounded by ledgers and coins, stacked like miniature towers. The air smells of wax and sweat. Your hand cramps from writing. You lend to merchants, nobles, even bishops. Everyone owes you something. You learn quickly that gold isn't power debt, still, you tread carefully. One angry debtor in armor can end your career faster than a market crash. So you cultivate politeness, always smiling, always keeping records neat. You begin each letter with "To my most honored friend," even if the man once tried to have you thrown in a river. As night falls, the streets of Florence glow with torchlight. You overhear whispers about kings mortgaging their crowns, popes hiding fortunes, and families ruined by one bad investment. You realize banking isn't just a trade, it's theater mixed with chess. One evening, you host a small gathering at your home. The guests are powerful: a guildmaster, a minor noble, a Dominican friar with suspiciously soft hands. Over wine, you listen more than you speak. Every rumor is a future prophet. A noble mentions the Pope's plan to build a new chapel. You nod, sip, and the next morning you invest in the marble quarry before the contracts even go public. That's how wealth in the Middle Ages worked. Information was gold dust. There's a strange calm in your work now. Gone are the haggling crowds and ship schedules. Instead, you wield ink and confidence. You don't need to shout. You simply move a few numbers, and a family across Europe either rises or falls. You learn to write in code-disguised languages only trusted clerks understand. You hide coin in church vaults, jewels under false floors, promissory notes in hollow book spines. Every transaction is a secret whispered through candlelight. Sometimes, while walking home past the great Duomo, you see peasants kneeling to pray, unaware that your coin funded the very stones above their heads. You chuckle softly. Maybe you even cross yourself after all. God seems to favor those who balance their ledgers well. But there's always that small worry. What if the church turns against you? What if they declare your clever fees sinful after all? You'd lose everything. So you donate a wing to a monastery, fund a few paintings of saints, and pay a priest to say mass for your souls just in case. There's one thing no rich man ever forgets: appearances protect profits. You never flaunt your gold. You let others whisper about it. You wear good wool, not jewels. You walk instead of ride. You smile humbly when people call you master. It's all part of the illusion. And late at night, when the torches outside fade, and only the sound of quills scratching fills your chamber, you realize you've become something larger than a merchant. You are a node in the invisible web of Europe's wealth, a quiet puppet master, pulling threads others Don T, even C. You think back to your days selling silk, sweating in the docks, dreaming of coins. If only that younger version of you could see you Knowledge beyond measure, feared and respected, the kind of person kings borrow from. You blow out the candle, smiling. You've played the long game and won, but the game isn't over. Somewhere beyond the city, a war is brewing, and war, as you now understand perfectly, is good business. By now, you've discovered that wealth in the Middle Ages isn't merely about accumulation, it's about influence. You can command coin, land, or silk, but true power that comes when people do what you want without realizing it. You walk through Florence's cobblestone streets, past merchants haggling over wool and copper, and you notice how they glance at you, not with envy, but with calculation. They're learning the lesson you mastered years ago. Follow the gold, and you'll follow the man who controls it. Your first real lesson in influence comes unexpectedly. A visiting cardinal arrives in town, a man rumored to wield more sway in Rome than most kings. He's here to inspect charitable donations and confirm alliances between noble families and the church. You hear whispers in the market that the cardinal prefers subtlety gifts that look accidental and favors that appear spontaneous. You grin. That's your specialty. You commission a small chapel painting for the cardinal's favorite monastery. The colors so vivid, the artist complains he's painting heaven itself. You send an anonymous shipment of fine silk as a gift to his attendants, and you pay a minor monk to write flattering letters about your generosity. Nothing overt, nothing traceable. Yet, by the time the cardinal arrives, you are already in his favor. Historians still argue whether the medieval church's influence over commerce was a blessing or a curse. You don't care. In practice, it's a tool, a ladder you can climb with proper timing and tact. Soon, letters arrive from noble houses, requests for loans, partnerships, and discreet favors. You're no longer merely a merchanteur, an intermediary, a banker, a silent power broker. You find yourself advising lords on investment strategies, while your own holdings quietly expand. By subtly funding a minor lord's campaign or offering guidance on estate management, you earn gratitude and future contracts, both far more valuable than the coin you initially lent. Yet, with influence comes danger. Rival merchants attempt to poison reputations with rumors of forgery, impure silk, or defaulted debts. You respond calmly, using charm and bribery in equal measure. You host lavish feasts where whispers are exchanged under the pretense of celebration. You keep enemies close, allies closer, and all the while your ledger grows. The subtle art of power requires patience. You can't simply demand loyalty, it must be nurtured, tested, and sometimes coerced without ever seeming coercive. You realize the medieval court is much like the marketplace. Information is currency, and perception is gold. On quiet evenings, you watch from your window as the city sleeps beneath the soft glow of torches and lanterns. You recall your earliest ambitions: barley fields, leased land, a single ship. You smile. The game has changed entirely, and yet the rules remain the same. Anticipate risk, invest wisely, and always appear humble. One minor scandal erupts. An unscrupulous tax collector accuses you of hiding assets. You invite him to dine, serve wine, laugh, and discuss the weather. By the end, he leaves with a gift and an apology. You've learned that influence isn't about intimidation. It's about bending circumstances so subtly that people bend themselves. You consider the larger implications. Through your network of contacts, you can affect entire trade routes, influence noble appointments, even guide city decisions, all without ever drawing a sword. The quiet power you hold rivals any lord's army. Historians still argue whether medieval wealth truly equaled power, or if it was merely a tool of survival. You suspect the answer lies in subtlety. Coin alone doesn't make a king, perception does, and you have mastered both. By candlelight, you draft letters to distant partners, instructing ships, transferring funds, and maintaining a web of connections that stretches from Florence to the ports of the Levant. It is exhausting, meticulous work, but exhilarating. The world is at your fingertips, and for the first time, you truly understand the adage: knowledge, strategy, and patience are as valuable as gold. As you extinguish the candle and settle into your chambers, the weight of your influence hums around you, a tangible, almost living presence. You've traded sweat for strategy, mud for silk, and labor for leverage. And yet, even as you drift to sleep, a small thrill runs through your veins. There are still higher ladders, grander trades, and further adventure. The game isn't over. It has only grown more intricate. The world has grown smaller, or perhaps you've simply stretched your grasp across it. You no longer only think of Florence or Venice. Now, your mind roams to far-off lands, places where the spices are worth more than entire estates, and silks shimmer with colors unseen in Europe. You imagine the bustling ports of Alexandria, the markets of Constantinople, and the mysterious bazaars of Cairo. Every coin in your purse is a key to those distant doors. By now, you've built a network of correspondence agents, factors, traders stretching across the Mediterranean and into northern Europe. Letters sealed with wax and coded in subtle ciphers pass between you and distant partners. Each word is carefully measured. A mistake could cost you far more than silver. You realize that wealth in this era is not just earned, it's managed. And managing it means knowing what others don't before they even know it themselves. You start dabbling in commodities that have little visibility, yet enormous profit. Alum from the Levant, tin from Cornwall, and salt from the Atlantic. You purchase small, secret shares in ships and caravans, invisible to the casual eye, but accumulating in staggering sums. You are patient, meticulous, and relentless. The medieval world rewards cunning above all else. Historians still argue whether medieval Europe was a continent of opportunity or of oppression. From your perspective, it is both a treacherous landscape that punishes the unprepared but elevates the clever. You've learned to read the signals: storms at sea, political turmoil, papal decrees, or the whispers of guildmasters. Each carries profit or peril, and your skill lies in discerning which is which. One quirky tidbit you've picked up: Venetian merchants used to carry pet monkeys aboard ships, both for companionship and as inadvertent stowaway insurance. If customs officials demanded a tally of cargo, the monkey's presence could distract them just long enough to slip a few bolts of silk unnoticed. You can't decide whether it's genius or madness, but the profit speaks for itself. Political instability, of course, is your constant companion. Kings go to war over trifle, and city-states shift alliances like the wind. One day a king might levy a tax on spices, the next a duke might confiscate goods under suspicion of smuggling. You respond not with anger, but with strategy. You finance minor rulers, campaigns, fund renovations, and ensure that when decisions are made, they favor you. Money may be temporary, but influence is enduring. You've also learned the art of quiet philanthropy. You fund a hospital here, repair a bridge there. Nobles and bishops may claim the credit, but the truth matters less than perception. You are weaving a reputation that shields you from envy and, sometimes, from legal scrutiny. In the Middle Ages, who you appear to be often outweighs what you actually are, and yet every success carries shadows. Pirates still roam the seas. Rival merchants whisper plots. Guilds monitor your moves, and occasionally a jealous noble sends word that he's concerned about your dealings. One wrong step, one miscalculated bribe, and decades of effort could vanish overnight. You sleep with one eye open, ledger under your pillow. Still, the rewards are intoxicating. You attend fairs where spices smell like fire, and money seems to grow from the soil itself. Silk flows like water, silver coins clink in hidden pouches, and every deal brings the thrill of mastery. You remember your early days, bent over barley fields, sweating and dreaming, and you can't help but smile. The leap from mud to mint was perilous, but it made every coin sweeter. Historians still debate whether medieval traders truly understood risk, or if they simply relied on luck. You know the answer. It's both. Luck is what grants the opening. Cunning is what turns it into a fortune. And you, by now, are no longer just lucky. You are cunning by candlelight, as the city's night hums beneath your window. You plot the next venture, a fleet, a contract, a shipment whose profit will dwarf even the wildest sums of your imagination. And for the first time, you realize this is no longer about survival or even comfort. It is about legacy. As the years pass, you begin to see the subtle ways in which wealth shapes not only cities, but entire societies. Your influence stretches quietly into councils, guilds, and courtrooms. You are no longer merely a trader, a banker, or a landholder. You have become a force, a subtle current moving through the medieval world. The streets you once walked as a laborer now bend around your ambitions. The markets that once intimidated you now bend toward your strategy. You invest in the printing of rare manuscripts, commissioning scribes to reproduce knowledge that is otherwise locked away in monasteries. Scholars, eager for patronage, flock to you, bringing ideas that could shape law, commerce, even navigation. You notice that education, like coin, can be wielded for power. With a well-placed book or a discreetly funded lecture, you influence the thinking of men who might otherwise hold power over you. Historians still argue whether medieval patrons of learning were genuinely enlightened or simply strategic. You don't mind the debate. In practice, it doesn't matter. Your goal is influence, and knowledge is simply another currency, one that doesn't rust, rot, or melt under pressure. You continue to diversify your holdings. Vineyards in Provence, wool from Flanders, spices from Alexandria, loans to distant nobles. Each venture carries its own risk and reward. One ship might sink. Another might deliver a cargo that could supply half of Europe for a season. You calculate, hedge, and balance. You even develop an uncanny instinct for reading the markets, almost like a sixth sense. The hum of a faraway port, a word from a merchant, a subtle shift in royal edictal of it informs decisions worth more than gold in any chest. Quirky medieval anecdotes float through your mind, tales of merchants who used owl feathers to detect thieves, or bankers who hid coins in hollowed-out hams. These oddities remind you that ingenuity often masks itself as absurdity, and the edge you hold comes from seeing opportunity where others see nonsense. Your personal life becomes a chessboard. Marriages, alliances, and friendships are all measured in potential returns. One widow's estate adds land and influence. A cousin's dowry secures a port lease. Romance is often incidental, a side effect of strategy rather than a guiding principle. But it doesn't feel cold. Strategy, after all, is its own kind of intimacy. Still, not everything is calculable. Plague returns in whispers through the countryside, threatening your tenants and your trade. Political revolts flare, guilds demand loyalty, and foreign powers attempt to claim trade routes as their own. You navigate these with careful diplomacy, a bribe here, a discreet loan there, and a public display of piety to the church. Appearance remains your shield. You notice something odd. Despite all the riches, all the influence, there's a weight that cannot be measured. Each coin comes with responsibility, each loan with a subtle expectation, each land purchase with a silent threat. You've learned to balance greed with caution, ambition with restraint. One wrong step, and centuries of effort could evaporate. Yet, even with these dangers, your confidence grows. The same hands that once tilled barley now sign ledgers worth thousands, arrange contracts that bind nobles, and approve shipments that change the course of commerce across continents. You've become indispensable, not to kings, not to guilds, but to the very flow of wealth itself. You remember, sometimes with a wry smile, the days when a sack of barley was your entire fortune. The contrast is dizzying, and it's a lesson you carry. Medieval riches are rarely linear. They demand vision, audacity, and a relentless appetite for risk. Those who hesitate often lose everything. Those who act, even imperfectly, can reshape their world. Historians still debate the morality of medieval commerce, whether cunning equaled corruption or cleverness was simply survival. You lean toward the latter. In a world this unforgiving, cleverness is not just virtue, it's salvation. Late at night, as you sit surrounded by ledgers, maps, and letters, you think you've traversed barley fields, silk markets, sea voyages, and banking halls. You've built fortunes that could rival minor nobility, survived dangers that would have claimed lesser men, and positioned yourself at the intersection of power, wealth, and influence. And yet, deep down, you know the journey isn't over. The next opportunity, the next voyage, the next calculation could be even greater. The Middle Ages, with all its peril and glory, still has room for those bold enough to seize it. By now, you're no stranger to the seductive rhythm of power. Each morning the city hums beneath your window, the clatter of carts over cobblestones, the shouting of fishmongers, the creak of gondolas gliding through canals. And yet, you've learned that being rich in the Middle Ages, isn't just about having coin at s, about being untouchable, untraceable, indispensable. You are woven into the fabric of the world itself. Your ventures grow bolder. You invest in fleets of ships that carry goods from Alexandria, spices that scent the city like exotic rain. You purchase warehouses and lease entire quays, ensuring that your trade routes are secure while others scramble for scraps. You've mastered the art of timing. One wrong season could sink a shipment. One right calculation multiplies your wealth tenfold. You feel a strange thrill each time a cargo arrives intact, knowing that invisible fingers guided it safely across the seas. Historians still argue whether medieval merchants wielded true autonomy or whether they were merely cogs in larger political machinations. You know the answer intuitively. Autonomy is relative, but cunning can carve freedom within any constraints. You are living proof. You've also become a silent architect of society. Lending to a minor noble ensures loyalty. Funding a guild's project secures favors. Supporting a monastery or a university brings both respect and influence. Each act is calculated, each move designed to secure your position. And yet, the city seems to thrive under your shadow, as if your wealth spreads like a secret fertilizer through every market and alley. One evening, a curious spectacle occurs. A traveling magician passes through town, offering strange devices that supposedly measure luck and fortune. He claims one can detect the hidden currents of wealth. You laugh, but secretly consider it. After all, your life has been about sensing currents of trade, influence, and opportunity. Perhaps magic is just another form of intuition, another way to read the patterns others ignore. You begin to understand that legacy is the truest form of wealth. You are no longer merely surviving. You are designing a future. You endow libraries, sponsor artisans, and commission works that will outlast your lifetime. Every coin spent strategically becomes an investment, not just in profit, but in remembrance. You may never hold a crown, but your name will echo in ledger books, trade contracts, and inscriptions long after the streets have changed. Quirky tidbit: some merchants kept detailed personal almanacs predicting everything from tides to political upheavals, scribbled in code only they could decipher. You adopt a similar method: marginal notes, hidden marks, and cryptic annotations that make your strategy almost unreadable to anyone but yourself. It's paranoia, perhaps, but it's effective. And yet, you remain acutely aware of the fragility of your empire. Wars erupt unexpectedly. Plague returns in shadowy waves, and the whims of kings or popes can turn friends into enemies. You guard your wealth as fiercely as a dragon its hoard, balancing risk against reward with a skill honed by years of trial. Historians still debate the ethical dimension of medieval wealth accumulation, whether it enriched society or exploited it. You conclude it depends on perspective. For you, it's survival elevated to art. For others, it may be mere injustice. Either way, the system rewards mastery, and mastery is precisely what you've cultivated. At night, overlooking the quiet canals, you reflect on how far you've come, from barley fields and leased plots to fleets, warehouses, and subtle political sway. The thrill of wealth remains, but now it is tempered with strategy, foresight, and the quiet satisfaction of playing a centuries-old game well. You understand that riches are never static. They must be moved, invested, protected, and occasionally hidden. And as the last torch flickers and the city drifts into slumber, you smile, knowing the Middle Ages are vast, dangerous, and utterly full of possibility for those bold enough to seize it. You, dear listener, have proven to yourself that with cunning, patience, and a bit of audacity, fortune is not a gift, it's a conquest. Now, the final stretch of your journey unfolds, not because you've reached an end point, but because you've mastered the rhythm of medieval wealth and influence. You've seen the barley field, the bustling markets, the candle-lit counting houses, and the distant ports where spices and silk arrive like treasure from the edge of the world. You've learned that riches are a combination of patience, daring, strategy, and a little luck that the fates toss at only the most attentive. Your empire now spans land, trade, and influence. You lease estates, fund fleets, and broker deals that ripple across kingdoms. But the real power lies not in what you hold in your hands. It lies in your ability to move others without them realizing they being moved. Merchants, nobles, clerics, even kings sometimes dance to a tune you've whispered from afar. Influence, you realize, is richer than any vault of silver. Still, life in the Middle Ages carries its eccentricities. You learn to navigate sumptuary laws, ensuring your robes display wealth without crossing forbidden colors. You dodge accusations of usury with clever terminology. You cultivate friends in the church, paying for indulgences en masse in ways that ensure your reputation remains untarnished. You've discovered the delicate art of invisible dominance, controlling markets, shipping routes, and even political outcomes, all while appearing humble enough to avoid envy. Historians still debate whether merchants and financiers truly shaped history or merely followed the currents of fate. You know the answer. Your choices, however invisible to the casual observer, ripple outward like stones in a pond. One well-timed loan, one strategic marriage, one subtle bribe has altered fortunes, alliances, and even the course of wars. You have become both participant and architect. You recall the quirky tidbits that color your story, the monkeys on ships, the secret almanacs, the coded letters, the silk-smuggling monks. They remind you that ingenuity often hides in absurdity, and fortune favors the bold and imaginative. Without them, perhaps you'd merely be another wealthy merchant. With them, you are a force capable of shaping cities and destinies. Yet, amid all this, caution never sleeps. Wars, plagues, fires, and political whims are constant shadows. You know that one wrong decision could reduce years of careful planning to ashes. So you hedge, diversify, and maintain a network of allies and secrets. The medieval world is brutal, but it rewards foresight, cunning, and a touch of audacity. By candlelight in your chambers, you look at ledgers stacked like towers, letters spread like maps, and ships' manifests that trace trade from Alexandria to London. Each mark, each coin, each annotation is a testament to the journey from humble peasant to architect of influence. The scent of parchment, ink, and candle wax fills the room, a reminder that medieval wealth is tactile, deliberate, and alive. As you settle for the night, you reflect on the lessons learned. Leverage land when you can. Exploit opportunities quietly. Use information as currency. And always, Always respect the precarious balance between risk and reward. Every coin has a story, every estate a secret, every contract a lesson. And though the Middle Ages are long gone, the strategies you've mastered, patience, cunning, and subtle influence remain timeless. You close your eyes, the soft hum of the city outside lulling you toward sleep. The journey from barley fields to international trade, from tenant to silent power, has been perilous and exhilarating, but above all, it has been illuminating. You've discovered that medieval riches were never about mere gold. They were about vision, audacity, and the courage to seize opportunity wherever it arose. Now, the pace softens. You sink into the quiet glow of candlelight, letting the sounds of distant canals and rustling leaves wash over you. The clatter of carts, the shouts of merchants, the creak of shipsail fade into a gentle hum, like the medieval world itself is exhaling after a long day. Your journey from barley-stained hands to corridors of influence has been long, complex, and, at times, perilous, but here, in this calm, it feels almost dreamlike. You remember the early mornings in the fields, the sweat, the mud, the aching muscles, and you smile. Those moments, though humble, were the foundation for everything that followed. Every lease negotiated, every coin counted, every risk calculated grew from that beginning. And as you let your thoughts drift, you realize that wealth in the Middle Ages was never only about gold, it was about perseverance, creativity, and the courage to step forward when opportunity arose. The markets, the cities, the distant ports, they all fade gently, leaving only the essence of the lesson. You've learned how to move invisibly through the currents of power, to influence without force, to transform risk into opportunity. The sound of scribes' quills, the whisper of trade agreements, the distant tolling of church bells, they form a quiet symphony, marking your passage through history. Now, as the world outside grows still, feel the weight of your own journey lift. The tension of strategy, the thrill of trade, the subtle art of influence all dissolve into a slow, calm rhythm. Imagine the cool stone of town halls, the warmth of lamplit streets, the soft scent of ink and parchment. Breathe in the quiet, let it settle, and as your eyelids grow heavy, remember, every empire, every fortune begins with a single step, a single decision, a single coin. The Middle Ages are vast, dangerous, and full of wonder, but tonight they rest gently around you. Sweet dreams.